Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Let Loose, the podcast dedicated to all things Gym Leader Challenge in the Pokemon TCG. Today I'm joined by a third time co-host Wheatr. I'm not sure, but we're glad to have you no matter the time. So Wheatr, what's up, man?
Not much. It's summertime. Summertime's always when card game activity picks up, so it's a good time to talk cards.
Oh yeah, and NAIC is coming up. I know you're heading that way. What are you excited about in terms of NAIC?
Well, I'm mainly headed there for business reasons, but of course I'll be glad to meet some people from the Cardboard Warriors community, play some GLC, you know.
Yeah, sounds sweet.
That's what I'm looking forward to the most.
Yeah, I wish I could go. Regionals and like big championships like that are something that I've not had too much of an opportunity to go and visit, but I'm going to live vicariously through you, so I'm excited. We might have an episode where you come back and tell us all about your escapades and all the cool things that you did while you were there.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah. Well, hey, today we're talking staple trainers. And we're going to be talking about, just what cards people should be playing in Gym Leader Challenge in their deck. We covered the majority of Pokemon when we did kind of our type-specific episodes, and we covered a lot of, type-specific trainers. Well, now it's time to talk about kind of the rest of the stuff that we need to put into our deck. So we're going to get to the staples. Good. Wheatr, when we talked about this episode a bit, we talked about, how you're not someone who plays a lot of staples in your deck, or you do play staples, but you're someone who likes to kind of, use some other obscure, maybe rogue cards is the way. Like, how do you go about picking what staples you do include in your deck?
Well, I think staples is a fairly common thing that new players are interested in figuring out. But the more you get into GLC, I think the more creativity. I think it's a common trend with players that as they get further into the game, they want to customize their decks to their own favored play style, and that definitely happened with me. So after playing many variations of staples and common decks like linear grass and rain dance water and on, I think it became more exciting to me to try and brew my own recipes, brew my own decks. And so what I typically do is I try to find an interesting win condition or maybe a favorite Pokemon or a card that looks really interesting and then build around that card.
Yeah.
And so try and pick the staples that fit that archetype or that win condition the best and build from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, yeah, for those of us who are just getting into it, or maybe who aren't quite, accustomed to the large card pool that Gym Leader Challenge has, these are the cards these are the staples that I think that most people are considering to put into their deck to give that deck the consistency that it needs. And the great thing about most of the staples, too, is most of them are relatively cheap. So let's just get going. We're going to start with, of course, the supporters. We talk about deck building a lot, Wheatr, and this gets brought up probably about at least once a month. But when it comes to deck building, certain people like to kind of put some constraints on how many of a certain type of card you should have. And with supporters, different numbers get thrown about. What numbers do you think? What's the number of supporters someone should look to include in a 60-card Gym Leader Challenge deck?
I think if you're building a classic or standard style list, you're looking at probably 12 to 15. You want to play one supporter a turn because supporters are uh, designed to have stronger effects than other cards because they have the once per turn limitation. So you definitely want to play one per turn. And I would say most games don't go past 15 turns almost for sure, unless you're in some sort of weird situation. Um, and you can also recycle supporters. So having a hand full of supporters is not good, and having no supporters in hand is not good. So finding some middle ground. I think 12 to 15 is probably the most common range, I'd
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, and I feel like some types get away with less. Like obviously, water and psychic that have ways to get supporters from their deck are going to be on the lower end. That's where that 12 number probably comes from. And then you look at types like fighting that don't really have a lot of onboard support, and they're probably going to be looking more for like the 15, maybe even 16. I've seen a fighting list that had 18 in it at one point, trying to do some Lieutenant Surge shenanigans, and I was like, well, I guess if that's one way to make sure you have supporters in hand, just play a lot of them. So supporters, again, once you get kind of the feel for your deck, you'll kind of know what you need to do. Again, 12 to 15, Lost Zone Psychic plays as few as 8. I think maybe I've even seen a list with 7 before, which is crazy. But you really only need one supporter in Psychic Lost Zone, and that's Colress Experiment. But let's talk the staples. So as far as setting up goes in Gym Leader Challenge, there are 3 key staples that people tend to kind of mull over in their deck. And Gloria and Bridget are basically functional reprints of each other. They're search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon and plop them right down onto your bench. So exact same card, more or less, especially in Gym Leader Challenge. Ball Guy is a little bit more interesting. Ball Guy is search your deck for 3 different item cards that have the word ball in them. Air Balloon does not count. But level ball, quick ball, which we'll talk about here in a bit. You get to search your deck, get those balls, shuffle your deck, but of course you're going to be right back in to use these balls to do something else. So these are the 3 setup supporters. What decks really want these cards, Leader?
So these are definitely setup supporters, like you mentioned. We're thinking of types that have multiple stage 2s, several evolution lines. So classic standard lists like linear grass needs to have a big board with Torterra, Rillaboom, Venusaur. You've got Rain Dance Water that might have multiple stage 2s. Psychic can run Gallade and Tinkaton, so Psychic definitely wants to have plenty of Pokemon search, and there it kind of depends as you branch out from those standard lists. It kind of depends on more so the archetype rather than the Pokemon type. So, like a tanky metal list that has Aegis Slash and maybe another stage 2 is going to need a bunch of setup supporters, and so really depends on how big you need your board state to be. I'd say the bigger the board state, the more setup supporters you're going to want.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. There's some other setup supporters that, didn't show up quite on the staple list. Something like Sonia, which is, 2 Pokemon or 2 energy. Sometimes see play in like a more flexible build. Clavel sees a lot of play in Psychic because it gets you 3 basics with 110 less to hand. So Marshadow is something that those decks think about. But these are the big 3, Gloria, Bridget, and Bulk. So, and all those decks you mentioned are definitely decks I play these cards in. Well, how do you get to some of the other cards in your deck? Well, you need draw. And so these are kind of the 3 one-sided draw supporters. We'll get into the more, I don't know, the inclusive draw supporters here in a second. But we got Cynthia, Professor's Research, and Colress. Cynthia and Colress are both shuffle draw effects. So Cynthia is shuffle draw 6, and then Colress is shuffle draw equal to the number of bench Pokemon. So this can be like as small as 3, depending on what's going on, as big as 10. When you get that 10 Colress, you're feeling good about life. Professor's Research is a little bit more costly as to its effect, but it does give you a fresh look at 7 new cards. So it's discard your hand, draw 7 cards. Weeder, what are you looking to play these cards then?
So Colress is great in any deck that wants a big board. So if you're expecting to have a full bench, Colress is going to draw you a ton of cards for most of the game. Colress is a terrible opening hand card, but beyond turn 2 or 3, it's usually really good. There's not really another shuffle draw supporter like it or quite as powerful. Cynthia could fit in most decks. Uh, just seeing 6 cards is really strong. Sometimes your hand might be full of dead cards that you can't play, so shuffling those back, saving them for later is good. And then research, I think Mahone said it on stream. If you want to play research, then the cards that are in your hand aren't doing it for you now. You got to find something new. So while it can feel bad sometimes to chuck some recovery or maybe an evolution Pokemon or something like that, often seeing 7 brand new cards is so strong that it's totally worth it.
Yeah. And discarding your hand can be a steep cost at a lot of times during a game. So not playing your professor's research during certain moments is actually like something I think that people just really need to develop. When we play base set, which is obviously retro Pokemon back in the day, you can play 4 copies of professor's research. And one of the reasons why like mill and stall decks were so popular back then is just because if someone's playing 4 research, that means they're burning through their deck, and it's pretty easy to stall them out. So definitely like holding on to the research, using it at the proper moment, just something people need to get used to. It's something I need to get used to sometimes still too. Shuffle draw effects. People get salty about shuffle draw effects, Weeder. Some people really, really, really hate putting cards back into their deck. Are you one of those people?
I've been burned by even Colress. I play Colress in my recent water deck, and I get shuffle draw for 9 or 10, not uncommonly, and the number of times I've drawn 7 supporters from it, it's really frustrating. It feels like shuffle draw is very random, and I think removing randomness from a game is good. So if there's a way to do that in your list, I prefer that, but sometimes it's hard to beat finding 6 or 8 or 10 new cards. So it's there are pros and cons to it.
Yeah, of course. And if you're playing like a stage 2 heavy deck like grass, like sometimes you don't necessarily want an effect like research because you're going to be discarding your evolutions that you're going to use later in the game. So maybe storing them back in your deck isn't such a bad idea with some of these shuffle draws. But those are the one-sided draw supporters. Again, pretty good, pretty popular. But now we have kind of, the all out, like, let's both shuffle draw some cards, or let's both do something and draw some cards. And that's kind of these disruption draw supporters in Iono and Marnie. So in is both players shuffle and draw equal to their prizes. So again, you can use it as disruption. If you're behind on prizes, your opponent gets to draw less cards than you. Super great. Iono is shuffle your hand, put it on the bottom, draw equal to prizes, both you and your opponent. And then Marnie is just consistently, both you and your opponent shuffle, put to the bottom. You draw 5, your opponent draws 4. So some pretty sweet options here if you're not looking to, just draw yourself, but if you're looking to put some pressure on your opponent's hand and their resources.
Yeah, and these disruption supporters make it into almost every deck. Their effects are super powerful. They counter a lot of setup cards like Alolan Vulpix or uh, attackers that get resources back from the discard pile. So throwing these down after one of those attacks is very strong. It's also really frustrating to see your perfect hand be shuffled away or put on the bottom of your deck. So you never know what's going to come next. And planning your plays out is a big part of the Pokemon TCG, and you tend to do that based on the cards in your hand. So when your opponent disrupts you like that, it definitely can throw a wrench into your game plan and be difficult to deal with. And in an Iono specifically can be late game win conditions if you can, or maybe comeback conditions, or maintain a current, like maybe if you're ahead on prizes and you end to 2, it can be a good way to like remove resources from your opponent so that they've only got a couple cards to work with. It's a really strong way to come back in a game.
Yeah, these cards are just really good. When I go to make any particular list, I'm definitely looking at least 2 of these, and some lists I'm running
Mhm.
all 3. When you go to build one of your decks, what's your go-to disruption draw supporter, Weeder? Like I think everyone has one. What's your go-to? What's the one you start with?
Probably Iono because I like the versatility of it for being good early game. If you got a bad hand, you can see a fresh 6. You're not going to get any of the same cards back, which is sometimes really nice. And then it still has the late game shutdown mechanic to it where you can reduce your opponent's hand to 1 or 2. But I've been kind of high on Marnie lately. I don't know. maybe it's just the style of decks that I'm playing lately, but it feels like I've been playing in an Iono early more often and just giving my opponent more cards to work with. So Marnie is a nice middle ground between the two. And if I'm running shuffle or sorry, disruption supporters, I definitely like Marnie plus one of in or Iono.
Mm. Yep, that's where I'm at too. Marnie is where I always start with because Marnie's always 5 for you and always 4 for your opponent. So it feels like your opponent's going to be down on cards. Very rarely do I find myself like, my opponent has 3 or 2 in hand and I'm giving them extra cards with the Marnie. And then, like you mentioned, it just depends on the decks you're trying to play. A lot of the decks that I tend to play don't want to put their good cards on the bottom of the deck. They're going to need them throughout to kind of find them later on because we don't have support in some of the decks I like to play, specifically fighting. So I usually go Marnie plus in some of my decks. But if it's a deck that can just, churn through the deck and find different things, it's going to be shuffling all sorts of ways. Iono is definitely a way, especially if your opponent is playing one of those decks like I was playing. So good, good, good. These are just cards. Play these cards. They're so good. Well, prizing inevitably is an issue in Gym Leader Challenge. I think it's probably a bigger challenge in Gym Leader Challenge, than it is in Standard, just because of the singleton nature. So getting things out of your prizes is a lot more important, especially when you've got one Grottle in your Torterra deck, and you need to make sure you find that way to search out Pokemon. Well, how do you get it out of your prizes? These are the ways. So these are the two main supporters to get things out of your prizes. We've got Gladion, which is just look at your face down prize cards, which is super important, face down, and you get to get one card and you swap it with Gladion. Peonia is a little bit different. Peonia lets you just pick up 3 prize cards, and then however many you picked up, you have to replace. So if you pick up 3, you put 3 face down onto your prizes as well. You get to know where the cards are with Peonia. With Gladion, you have to shuffle them back in. So these are your prize searchers. Wheatr, what's your go-to for specific decks?
So I think Gladion's most common. I think many gym leader challenge decks have kind of a linchpin to their strategy. Thinking of something like Dragon, which has fast call Dragonite, or uh, Double Dragon Energy, something like that. A few very powerful cards that if they're all prized, well, you're probably toast anyways. But Gladion can just go get the right one at the right time for you. Whereas I think slower, more not necessarily controlling decks, but slower decks that have a lot of combo pieces and can refill their hand easily. Peonia is really good because as you build a big hand, you can actually put the bad cards into your prizes. So uh, those are the differences I see between the two. In a deck like Metal Zone or Rain Dance, where you're dumping a lot of energy every turn, sometimes Peonia can grab multiple energy off the prizes in one go. Or uh, and when you're using your shuffle draw, or sorry, draw up to support cards like Artillery or Rev of Room, you can put cards that are getting stuck in your hand and reducing the amount you draw, which is very important in those style of decks. You can put those cards into the prizes and take them later. And then I think there's probably a third style where you want to run both, and that's I think control decks really like to play both because they can be really reliant on having their full strategy, and so prizing can really affect control decks badly. So control decks love to play both usually.
And if we're going to go that far, there's even probably a fourth deck, which I realize now that I don't have time map in our item section, but the card town map exists, which is just flip over your prizes. And if you're an aggressive style deck like Turbo Dark or Lightning that's going to be taking kind of early prizes, town map is a good way for you to look at your prizes, see what you need, and take something from it. So again, that's probably the fourth type deck that's probably not even bothering with Gladion or Peonia, just trying to take early KOs and draw the right card from their prizes. Well, just some kind of like utility supporters now. We've talked drawing, we've talked prizes, we've talked setup. Well, these are just kind of some other supporters that kind of do it all in a sense. So Guzman Holic here, which is like, I don't know, I think it might be like the best supporter in Gym Leader Challenge at the moment. Maybe it or the card next to it, Arvin, maybe both have kind of a stake in it. But Guzman Hala is search for a stadium card. All right, that's not a super great effect. But if you discard two other cards, you can go get Stadium, Pokemon Tool, and a Special Energy. So really, really busted and a lot of utility with what it's doing. Basically, you're trading 3 cards for 3 specific cards in your deck. Arvin here is item and a tool. So it's kind of like a baby Guzmahala in a sense. And then Mallow is just, search your deck for 2 cards and put them on top of your deck. Wheatr, what are you doing with Guzmahala, Arvin, and Mallow?
So, as you mentioned, Goose Mahala's definitely one of the strongest card supporters in GLC right now. They're just printing, as every year goes by, more and more broken stadiums, special energy, and tools. And so it will become more versatile as time goes on. Whereas I think, shuffle draw supporters and setup supporters, those are pretty static in terms of value. So I see cards like Arvin and Guzman Hall getting value over time. And I think right now the biggest trend is grabbing uh, technical machines with them. So Arvin for Turbo Energize and Poffin or VIP Pass or something like that is a common play. Also got similar with Guzman Hall, you can run the Artisan, Capture Energy, and TM Evo combo. You can run it for Donks to get uh, Retreat Tool, Energy for attacking, and just to win a game on turn 1. It's a lot of different options there. And then Malo, I think, has gotten a lot more usage lately. Became popular in the Turbo Snorlax deck because it can draw every turn regardless of how full its hand is. So you can pick 2 perfect cards, and specifically special energy, which are hard to search normally. Malo can grab special energy anytime. So if you have an ability that's drawing off the top of the deck and you run special energy, maybe something like tools or stadiums that are hard to search otherwise, Malo's a really good card. And it got a reprint recently in Cypher Maniac, so it's got a lot of redundancy there and consistency. So it's a really nice card with a lot of the draw abilities that are out right now.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like specifically decks like, Dark that have the Liepard, which is discard 1, draw 2. You can take advantage of a card like Mallow. You see Dragon with Regidrago drawing up 2. It works well with Pokestop too, especially if you're trying to put items on top. Max Elixir, stacking your deck with energies. The same thing with the new Batang from Metal. So Mallow is a card I used to not be so high on, and now you're kind of seeing it pop up kind of all over the place because, when you have 2 Mallows, you can kind of build your deck to take advantage of it more. So Mallow, I think, has become more and more of a staple as I've played, but Arvin and Guzmahala are just so good. Like you mentioned, the precision that these cards give you over, shuffle draw supporters that can just give you 6 random cards. That's what you're looking for in a singleton format. All right, now we got some KO conditional supporters, and you're probably sitting back being like, KO conditional? I don't want my Pokemon to get knocked out. Well, these cards are really good that sometimes you're just sitting there hoping that your Pokemon get knocked out so you can get a turn going or set up kind of a busted combo. So we got 3 here. Raihan and Mela both require energy attachments from your discard pile. So you actually need not only a Pokemon to be KO'd, but you need to make sure that you have a basic energy, and Melo specifies fire energy. So with Raihan, you attach a basic energy from your discard pile to one of your Pokemon. If you do, you search for any card. Mela is, again, KO conditional, but you attach a basic fire and you draw up to 6. Teammates over here, again, also KO conditional, but instead of attaching an energy from the discard pile, you actually just to go find 2 cards from your deck, any 2 cards, and put them into your hand.
Yeah, these are great supporter cards. They're probably some of the strongest cards that exist, and a lot of decks can't really function without them. I know Dragon basically wouldn't exist without Raihan, for example. Um, Mela's taken on a similar role. People are altering decks just to play Fire Energy for the effect of Mela. Turbo Snorlax did that. Dragon is adding more Fire Energy to be able to play it. So those are very powerful cards. And then I'm pretty sure every deck wants to play at least one. Now, you might pick a different one based on how your deck wins, but uh, grabbing two cards off of teammates, for example, can set up your entire board. So you can grab rare candy and stage two, you can grab some control tools. You can grab your special energy for return revenge KO, and I think probably one of the most powerful uses of teammates is grabbing something like Lost City, uh, which is otherwise kind of hard to find to shut down your opponent. So there are a lot of different ways you can use these. Are very versatile, um, and there's almost no way around them. The only really real way you get around them is poison or burn knockouts during setup. So really useful, universally useful cards.
Yeah. And it's really hard for one Pokemon to sweep in Gym Leader Challenge. Like your main attacker is going to get KO'd at some point. So being able to charge something up with Raihan and Mela is huge and impactful, like you mentioned. We put Mela up here too. It's just fire, and you mentioned that there are some other dark decks that are looking to play fire energy too. But outside of fire and Turbolax, you even have decks like Ancient Garganackle with the fire synergies with the Colossal line are considering a card like Mela. That's how powerful an effect like this is. So it's definitely a staple. These three cards are definitely staples. Rosa is a third or maybe fourth kind of KO conditional card that doesn't see as much play. It's a little on the pricier side, I think, which is maybe one of the reasons why it doesn't. But it's Pokemon, any trainer card, and a basic energy. So it gets you three cards, but it's conditional on what the three cards have to be. So just another thought if you're thinking what KO conditional cards to include. All right, recovery cards, Wheatr. And Pokemon TCG is all about getting cards back and reusing the good ones. So we've got three up here. Clara is basically the only Pokemon recovery supporter I see played besides maybe type specific ones. So Clara is two Pokemon or two basic, but you can do both. So you can just get two Pokemon and two basic energy back to your hand, which is great. Tulip exists, which is kind of like, any four Pokemon or basic energies for Psychic, and same with Nessa. So Clara is kind of like a bargain bin version for every type. Cynthia and Caitlin and Lusamine both give you the option of getting back supporters. Lusamine has the added luxury of also getting you a stadium. So Cynthia and Caitlin is put a supporter card into your hand from your discard pile. If you discard a card, you can also draw three. And Lusamine is just put two in any combination supporter and stadium. So how are you using these cards to recover things?
Well, I really like Clara as a card. It's got combos. There are a lot of combos you can do with it. The common ones being Larian Articuno is basically a full attack from the discard pile. When you pull that into energy back, you've got uh, Galarian Moltres, which is similar. And then I guess all the Galarian birds, Galarian Zapdos as well, they all have a uh, similar ability there. But then I think it's such a powerful uh, effect that types that don't have Tulip or Nessa really want it. It's just a good recovery card in general. A lot of decks are getting more and more to rely on just a couple of attackers, or they're really singling out a specific strategy and making it as optimized as possible. So Claire is really good at recycling that style of, or for recycling in that style of play. There's the new card that just came out, Lana's Aid, which I think will be. It's like a super rod versus ordinary rod debate. Lana's Aid gets three of. You can get three Pokemon or three energy or any combination of the two. So I think we'll see that card become a staple to some degree. And then the supporter recovery is really important with Cynthia and Caitlin and Lusamine. BF Seeker only goes so far, and so if you're a deck that relies on a few powerful supporters, Lusamine and Cynthia Caitlin are very good at getting them back. And uh, Cynthia and Caitlin drawing cards and being part of the tag call engine is another added bonus of that.
I think that's maybe like one of the reasons why you see Cynthia and Caitlyn see so much play. Like by itself, it's a pretty reasonable card, and sometimes it is just discard one, draw three. Like I hate to say how many times I've done that, but it happens more often than you think, and you can actually do that according to the rules. But Cynthia and Caitlyn is just so often extra fodder to your Guzman Hala off of a tag call. So I think that's really, really, really where you see Cynthia and Caitlyn seeing so much play. But again, still a good card. I play it in so many decks. Back to what you mentioned about Clara too. So many decks rely on one energy attackers too, which is why Clara is so great. You can recover and get that energy back for almost an immediate attack. So I think Clara, like that's the reason why I love it in Hitmon Bros. It's just so good. Get back one of your combo pieces and an energy your opponent thinks you've been disrupted. Nope, here's the next combo train, and I've got all the pieces off of this one card. So love me some Clara, and Lucamine's great too. Well, switching always important, and we got some kind of flexible switch cards here. So Tate and Liza is a modal card, so you got two options here. You can either shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 5 cards, or you can just switch your active with one of your bench Pokemon. So you have to choose one or the other, no option for both. Birdkeeper is kind of a combination of that, but at a lower rate. You get to switch your active with one of your bench Pokemon. If you did that, you get to draw 3 cards. And then Mallow and Lana here is one of those tag team cards like we just talked about with Cynthia and Caitlyn. You get to switch your active with one of your bench Pokemon, and if you decide to discard 2 cards, you get to heal 120 damage with the Pokemon that was moved to your bench. So, some pretty flexible options here.
Yeah, switching is very important. GLC decks often have several switch effects. If you don't have them, control will eat your lunch, and generally just stalling can be a good tactic for a deck to catch up. So switch effects are really important. I think Tate and Liza's recently fallen off in popularity. I don't know really why that is. Maybe because Iono was released. I think that's probably when it started losing popularity. But there's so many good supporter cards now that's really hard to pick. It's just really hard to narrow them down. So definitely you need it to include at least one switching supporter. I think most every deck runs Guzma, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. But these cards are good, really good in decks that have like switching uh, attacks with switching effects like Hoopa or Zapdos. And especially in Hitmon Bros, I know your Birdkeeper is basically your favorite, and it's really good in decks like that need to get something active to either start a combo or get set up quickly. And then, of course, your tank and heal decks love Mallow and Lana. It's such a good card, and for those styles of play.
Yeah. And, it feels bad when your, 3 retreat Pokemon is stuck in the active and you don't have any outs to switching it. So having something flexible like Tate and Liza that can not only help you kind of churn through your deck and find cards that you need, but that can also be a, switch card in the clutch is great. I don't really know why Tate and Liza has kind of fallen off. Obviously, I prefer Birdkeeper in a lot of the lists that I do, but like if I wasn't playing Birdkeeper, I'd be playing Tate and Liza. So I would encourage a lot of people, especially if you're finding a list, Tate and Liza is very flexible. Neither of its effects are particularly amazing, but just the flexibility of it is worth a spot in almost every list. And the same thing can be said for Birdkeeper. Obviously, if you're a deck that doesn't have a lot of on-board draw or on-board search from your Pokemon abilities, Birdkeeper is a card that can give you an effect and then keep you looking for new things as you go throughout the game, which is why Birdkeeper is such a great card in decks like Hitmon Bros or even something like Dark that only has Leopard to kind of draw through cards. I think Birdkeeper could see more play. I would love for it to see more play, but obviously I'm a little biased there. But Mal and Lana are just always good in those tank and heal strategies, like you said, too. And again, you might just end up discarding it to Guzman Hala, so there's really no loss in putting it in a deck, especially if you're running tag team or tag call. All right. Speaking of take and heal, Mal and Lana is probably the best healer, and I even debated maybe not even including this slide just because, take and heal strategies, you don't see them super often, or if you do see them, it's part of like a different core strategy. Like it's less about healing and more about playing big basics with tools. So like Mal and Lana is your best one, and then beyond that, it's slim pickings really. So Cheryl heals all damage from your evolution Pokemon. You get to discard all energy. And then Cook is so bad, but it's like the only other one I could really find. Cook is just heal 70 damage from your active card. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on maybe tank and heal in general and the support that they have?
I wish Take and Heal were better. It's it's fun to play when it works, but you normally require a huge board state, and the healing supporters that we have outside of Mallow and Lana all have either not very much healing, like Cook. 70 doesn't feel very strong usually, and then Cheryl, which is full healing, but it discards all energy. So often the big tanky guys have a 3 or 4 attack cost. And so Cheryling away all of that energy can be really painful, or you need some convoluted strategy to get the energy elsewhere. So I wish it were better, and it could be good. Tank and Heal could be good if Pokemon would stop releasing cards with 280 damage, or I think they just released a basic that does 220. So we're it's a hard life out here for the tank and healers for sure.
Yeah. And all tank and heal strategies these days kind of feel oriented towards basics. How can I reduce damage on basics? And so even a card like Cheryl here that heals all damage from evolution Pokemon wouldn't necessarily even see a place in most tank and heal strategies, or at least decks that I consider to be running around the format that are tank and heal strategies. I think you're going to see Cheryl. We both love to play it in Ursaluna because you're usually, playing recycle energy that when it does get discarded, it just comes back to hand. Or, Ursaluna's attack discards it. So Cheryl's going to see a lot of play in decks like that. You mentioned convoluted strategies. There were metal decks that used to play the Bronzong that could switch energy around. So you could maybe play Cheryl on that list, switch all your energy to a basic, heal your evolution, Caparaja, and put the energy back on. It's just kind of wombo combo when it gets to those points. So, you're usually relying on stadiums to heal. There's a couple good type specific stadiums. So check those out if you're into take and heal strategies. Supporters, you got slim pickings. All right, gust effects. We've got 2 really powerful gust effects in Gym Leader Challenge. These are basically it when it comes to gust effects, but they see universal play. So Guzma is a gust effect for not only one of your opponent's Pokemon that you get to choose, but it's also one of yours. So Guzma really strong, not only as a switch tool, but also as one to kind of take a KO in one of your opponent's, key supporters in a clutch, or maybe their attacker that they're charging up. So there's Guzma for you. And then Boss's Order is just, pick one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and switch it into the active. Pretty good.
Yep, they're so good, in fact, that Pokemon released a limitation on Boss's Orders that you can't have. Lysander has the same effect, so it's such a strong card that even in Standard you can't run 4 of each. And I think that's really all there is to say to it. If you get ahead in any way and you have a boss or a Guzma on a critical support Pokemon on the bench, that can by itself win a game for you. So these are among the strongest effects that exist in GLC.
Yeah. Guzma sees play in every single deck. I don't think I've ever seen a Gym Leader Challenge deck posted that didn't have Guzma for whatever reason. And it's just that powerful. Every deck should be playing it. Buy yourself 8 or 10 copies of this card if you're planning on building multiple decks. Just do it. Boss's Order doesn't necessarily see play in decks that have strong comeback potential. You'll see it a lot in aggressive builds that are trying to deal with kind of pesky bench Pokemon. But you'll see Boss Order played a lot, especially in builds that have supporter search, Psychic with the Glade. Buddy Catch Glade can grab Boss's Order on command. The same thing with, Dragon. Those are definitely builds that definitely want to play both of these, but Guzma is obviously your first choice. All right. Some kind of more controlling supporters that I do think we can consider staples here. Hexmaniac is, just a terror. It's just so good. And when you see people complain about this card, it's because some decks can utilize it more than once, more than twice, maybe even 3 or 4 times in a game. And that can be really frustrating for people when that happens. So Hexmaniac is just until the end of your opponent's next turn, each Pokemon in play, player's hand, discard pile, have no abilities. So it's basically just shuts off everything in the game except whatever attacks your Pokemon can use. Delinquent is another kind of disruptive supporter. You discard a stadium in play. If you happen to do that, your opponent discards 3 cards from their hand. And then Avery here, you get to draw 3 cards. And if you drew any cards, your opponent has to discard their bench down to just 3 from the full 5.
Yeah, this is probably my favorite slide of all of them. I love Delinquent's my favorite supporter. If that makes me slightly toxic, but there's nothing more satisfying than Delinquent to 1 or 0 cards. It's just that's part of strategies that I like to play lately. But objectively, I think Hexmaniac is far and away the strongest disruption supporter, especially in decks that can search it out, like you said before, like Fast Call Dragon or Buddy Catch with Glade. And it really limits your opponent's responses when you hex and knock out an attacker. So, very strong card. Avery is, I think, borderline staple. It doesn't see as much play anymore. I think it got crowded out by some of the new supporters, like maybe Iono or Arvin, even. But it's still a very strong effect, and Parallel Cities, one of the top stadiums, has the same effect. And so if you ever land in Avery, it does feel really good and can be painful for your opponents for sure.
Yeah, I think maybe Avery's decline, because I'm with you. Maybe it's not quite the staple it used to be, especially when I started playing the format. But I think Avery's decline maybe happened when Grass stopped being kind of like a top
Mm.
deck as well, because like Avery just stops Grass in its tracks. If your Torterra can't hit for tons of damage, which Avery helps limit that bench, and helps get rid of those evolution Pokemon that boost Torterra's damage, it can be backbreaking for those sorts of decks. So Avery sees less play, I think, because of that. Obviously, like decks like Turbo Snorlax have kind of come into the fray that don't really need a lot of bench space. So I think that maybe is where Avery is doing, but I get what you're saying with Iono kind of coming in. There's just, and you alluded to this earlier, so many good supporters, and you can only pick 12 to 15, right? You're not picking tons of supporters in your deck. So, there's some tough cuts that need to happen. And Avery is probably, unfortunately, maybe 63rd, 64th card in a lot of lists.
Mhm.
Well, all right. Deck of the week. Let me switch the screen to make the deck list a little bit bigger here. But this is a deck that I've been playing a little bit recently, and it got recommended to be deck of the week, and we're gonna throw it up here because I love me some Hitmon. So this is Hitmon Broskies from Castella, and it's basically your typical Hitmon package, but it's got the new Okie Dokie in it with the Adrenopower ability. If it has a dark energy attached to it, it gets 100 more HP and 100 more damage. So you're running your typical Hitmon combo, which is Hitmonchan, Hitmonlee, and Hitmontop that need to be played in succession. They need to attack in succession. Each attack is 1 energy, retreat cost is 1, so they kind of sequence into each other pretty well. Hit and Run is 30 and then switch to the bench. Hitmonlee is 90 to any bench Pokemon, and then Hitmontop is 60 anywhere. So again, game plan is get that combo going early and often, and if you could repeat the loop, you basically win the game. Since that doesn't happen too often, you need some backup plans to take maybe a couple more prizes at the end of a game. So you've got Machamp, Crisis Muscles Machamp that does 100 damage for 2 energy, but you can do 200 if you decide not to attack the following turn. Same thing with this Lucario here. It's a revenge attacker. It's just 1 energy and it does 150 and it can take a prize in a clutch. You're going to notice that this list is, running a lot more supporters than you would see in other lists. I think this list is up to 15, 16. Tons of recovery cards because you need to get those Hitmons back in a timely fashion. Switch cards help out a ton as well because, again, you're trying to combo and switch in and out. And because of Okie Dokie, you kind of see the energy count down here. It's 4 basics plus 4 special energy, all of which can provide dark energy. So this list is sweet, Wheatr. Have you had a chance to play against it yet?
I haven't, but I'm lacking my fighting badge, and this is definitely on my list for trying to get that. It's, I think, far and away the best fighting list that exists right now. Costella's shown a lot of results with it. And Okie Dokie is probably a perfect add to the deck. Makes a giant wall for when late game or maybe even early game sweeping. Uh, so it seems like a really strong deck and really fun way to play.
Yeah. You know, I also play a lot of Hitmon Bros, so I ended up, building a similar list to what Costella did here. Obviously, he and I have some personal preferences that we differ on. I ended up throwing Ninja Boy into my list, and Ninja Boy lets you
Oh.
switch a basic from your battlefield with one in your deck. So I had a turn two Okie Dokie, and I started Machop. So it was kind of hilarious, and then that Okie Dokie basically swept the game from that point on. So and Ninja Boy was definitely interesting with this build, and it's just a personal favorite. So I don't know if I would recommend it to anyone, but it's something that I'm going to continuously play just because I love that card so much.
So if you were to swap one, I think I love the Ninja Boy combo as well. If you were to swap one card from this list for Ninja Boy, what would it be?
So he's playing Rosa and he's playing Rhyme, and I love me some Rhyme, but I think that maybe one of those cards would be the switch off the top of my head. I'm also not playing Echoing Horn. I love Echoing Horn. I've always tried to kind of think about how I could put Echoing Horn in my list, but I've always found it not to be. I mean, it's very situational, and having situational cards in fighting is tough. So you can really only have like one to two, and I've opted for Ninja Boy really in that spot. So those are all cuts that you could potentially make: Rosa, Rhyme, Echoing Horn. But I love the Buddy Buddy Rescue, which is just you grab a card, any Pokemon from your discard pile, and your opponent grabs any card from their discard pile. Well, if you're going to be using that card this turn, which all of the Hitmons just need one energy, you're getting more value than your opponent. And so I think that Buddy Buddy Rescue is great. Of course, it's probably about to be swapped out for, I think, Nightly Rescue is the name of the card,
Hmm.
which is just going to be printed in the next set, Fabled Shroud, which is you get back a Pokemon or an energy from your discard pile, so you don't have to give your opponent anything.
Yeah, that card's going to be great for Hitmon Bros. I think very versatile, multiple ways to use it.
Hmm. Oh
Should
yeah,
be a boost to the deck.
yep, yep, yep. Well, all right. Continuing on with our staples, we're going to be talking items now. So those were the supporters. So again, lots of supporters to pick from. Weeder, I know you alluded to it. Is Delinquent your favorite supporter?
Yeah, it for sure is. I don't know why. I don't know what that says about me as a person, but it's definitely my favorite.
I still enjoy playing against you, so maybe you've just been sandbagging the delinquents so that we'd remain friends. For me, again, it's not a good card, but it's Ninja Boy. Like I love Ninja Boy. The art on Ninja Boy is great. The fact that you can say Ninja Boy, the fact that like it's on point with like you're switching in and like bringing a card out, like Ninja Boy is so great. I love that card. I hope it if it drew three cards, it would see play in every deck. Like if they ever print
Oh yeah,
like Ninja Man. Ninja Man is just you know
he's
that
grown
exact
up.
effect. But all right, let's talk about items here. And obviously, the first thing we need to talk about is all the busted Pokemon search that exists. So all the balls exist, and I'm not going to spend time talking about all the balls because they just are all so specific. But if basically every deck is playing Ball Guy as the setup support, or even decks that aren't trying to set up too much play Ball Guy. And so you have tons of options, and the staple options, like almost balls that every deck is going to play, is Level Ball, Nest Ball, Quick Ball, Hisuian Heavy Ball, Timer Ball, and Ultra Ball. But these are basically the six. Sometimes you'll see people go down to five because no one likes the double tails on Timer Ball. And then type specific balls exist like Dive Ball or Net Ball in Grass. Feather Ball exists, Heavy Ball exists. So, you can get a lot of value off of a ball guy because these items exist. What's your number? Are you a Timer Ball guy, Weeder?
Oh, that's probably the most controversial card in GLC. Uh, or maybe polarizing, however you want to phrase it. But I've been trying it recently in a deck that needs its evolutions, and it just the number of double tails is extraordinary. So I don't like it, but I feel like the synergy with All Guy is really good in decks that don't have Dive Ball or Net Ball or Team Magma is Great Ball, some of the other options. So I feel like six is a good number
Hmm.
of ball cards to include. And so sometimes I include it. I think kind of depends on the deck, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and
I'm
with
I'm I'm in the mixed camp on it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I include it in decks that I think really, really value their evolutions. But like, if I'm ever like, oh man, I'm at 62 or 61 cards, one of my first cuts is always Timer Ball because even
Oh yeah.
if it's not right, it's just like the feel bad sometimes, it can definitely take kind of the wind out of your sails, even if you're winning in a game and you're just like, oh cool, I just need one heads. Oh, double tails, man. But I do think like obviously Hisuian Heavy Ball might be the most important card in Gym Leader Challenge. Again, not the best card or not the flashiest card, but I think it might be the most important card. So the fact that Hisuian Heavy Ball lets you look for a basic in your prizes is great. Every deck has prizes. Every deck plays basics. You should be playing Hisuian Heavy Ball in almost every single deck. So Ball Guy really helps grab that with that consistency. I'm hoping if Pokemon Company International ever decides to start printing cards for Gym Leader Challenge, I hope one of the first on their list is a Hisuian Heavy Ball that's for evolution Pokemon, because I think that would help out a ton with the consistency of our singleton format.
Yeah, we need a Paldean luxury ball or something like that to grab evolutions. Playing Gladion just to get one evolution Pokemon is very painful, and I do think that would make evolution decks more viable. I think big basic decks are kind of rule the format for the most part, so giving a little boost to setup decks would be pretty fun, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, other Pokemon search exist, and these are two of the best at it. Buddy Buddy Poffin recent printing from Temporal Forces. Basically, search your deck for two basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less and put them onto your bench. Battle VIP Pass is similar. You can only use during your first turn, so a little bit of a downside there. And you can search your deck for two basic Pokemon, no HP limitation, and put them onto your bench. So basically, two Pokemon for one card here. Pretty good.
Really good, busted cards. I think Buddy Buddy Poffin's taken a place of Bridget or Gloria in a lot of decks, and feels incredible to start with it turn one going first. So really good cards all around. Battle VIP Pass, I think, probably fallen out of favor since Buddy Poffin was released, but still think it's a good card in the right deck and has such a strong effect.
Yeah. I do not play Battle VIP Pass. I get that it probably has its place in some decks. I do not play those decks. Like item based builds are where you're going to see a lot of Battle VIP Pass. Just because you have a couple of searches and looks for on turn one outside of what other typical decks might have. But man, drawing it like on turn two or three and just having a card with no text at some points and a build like fighting feels really bad to me personally. So I'm not going to gamble on a card like Battle VIP Pass. If you're a gambler, if you're braver than I am, I'm a coward. I'm going to let that be known. I'm a coward, everyone. I will not play Battle VIP Pass. But if you are brave, if you are made of sturdier stuff, you can put both of these in your deck, and that'd be fine. All right. Speaking of evolution support, there's three cards that see a lot of play, especially in evolution heavy decks. Almost every deck with an evolution runs evolution incense. Search your deck for evolution Pokemon, and you get to put it into your hand. Evo Soda is equivalent to Evolution Incense, but with a little bit more limitation on it. Search your deck for a card that evolves from one of your Pokemon in play, and then you can evolve it. But you have to follow the evolution rules in order to be able to play this card. So, like, I'd have to wait a turn before I could evolve my Zubat using Evo Soda, whereas Evolution Incense maybe could let me thin my deck at a different point. Rare Candy is great. Basically, one of the reasons why Stage 2s are playable in Gym Leader Challenge. You can go straight from a basic to a Stage 2 as long as you use Rare Candy, and it's a card that's been around for forever. I mean, if you think back to the original printings, there was a different card, Pokemon Breeders is what it was called. It did the same effect. It's been around the Pokemon TCG for as long as Pokemon has been alive.
Yep, great cards, important cards. Evo Soda, I don't see as frequently anymore unless you're running like a really vanilla list, but still a great card. And I think maybe it's because I don't play decks like this currently, but any deck that has on play effects for evolutions is not as high on Evo Soda because you don't get the played from hand effects. So something like Shady Dealings or Roserades, Loparfum. So Evo Soda is great, and probably decks like Fighting, where I don't think it has any on evolve effects. Uh, Colorless maybe only has Delcatty, but yeah, it's a great card, but I think it's fallen out of favor a little bit because of Timer Ball and maybe TM Evolution.
Yeah, it's definitely harder to get Evo Soda than it is to get Timer Ball, and there are going to be points in games when you can't play Evo Soda at all. Evo Soda is probably one of those like rule sharky cards where like, hey, can that Pokemon actually evolve this turn? You're going to have to like double check, whether Evo Soda is playable on a certain board. So Evolution Instance always playable. You can always play and fail it. Evo Soda not as much. It's going to be difficult to thin it out of your hand from time to time. Well, switch cards are important as a supporter, while they're also equally as important as item cards, and there's some pretty good ones here. Escape Rope makes your opponent switch, and you're also going to be able to switch as well. Then there's Good Old Fashioned Switch, which is just you get to switch your active with one of your benched, and then Scoop Up Net I've included here as a switch card, but it's really a lot more flexible than that. Basically, put one of your Pokemon that's not a rules box Pokemon, which is everything in Gym Leader Challenge, into your hand, but discard all attached cards.
Yeah, Escape Rope, almost ubiquitous in GLC. Getting Wheezing, Galarian Wheezing, or Wobbuffet out of the active is so important. It also enables cards like Zapdos and Hoopa to do their attacks on turn 1 or 2. And then Scoop Up Net was strong enough to get banned and expanded in Japan. So there are a lot of cards that are heavily benefited with Scoop Up Net. So being able to reuse evolution abilities is incredibly strong. And it's also great is just getting something that's stuck out of the active. So really important cards on the screen right now.
Yeah, for sure. And Switch doesn't see like a ton of play because cards like Escape Rope and Scoop Up Net exist and have so much utility. But you'll still find if you're a deck that's heavily reliant on switching bench to active, Switch is a card you'll see. All right, recovery cards. So many good ones. Rescue Stretcher is, you a modal option again. You get to choose one of them, not both. Put a Pokemon from your discard pile into your hand, which is great with big basics. Or you can shuffle 3 Pokemon from your discard pile into your deck. Super Rod is shuffle 3 in any combination of Pokemon or energy back into your deck. And Ordinary Rod is a choose one or both modal, shuffle 2 Pokemon or 2 basic energy into your deck. And of course, you can do both options.
Yeah. Uh, Without recovery, I don't know what GLC would be like. So these are cards in every deck, maybe not all of them, definitely 1 or 2. And then the new nightly rescue card is going to be a big add as well. So yeah, important cards, not fun to play all the time, but necessary in basically every deck.
Yeah, it's like brushing your teeth. Like it's not fun, but you have to do it. And so, Rescue Stretcher, Super Rod, Ordinary Rod, even like cards like Revive or Buddy Buddy Rescue, just brushing your teeth, man. Just do it. Make sure you can play your basics over and over again, especially in a format where that's the common thing. Well, reusing Pokemon is great. Well, so is reusing supporters. Versus Seeker is your best option. Basically, just put a supporter from your discard pile into your hand, so you get that immediate impact. You can kind of stash a card like Guzma or Raihan away for later, and use VS Seeker as a way to just like, oh, surprise, I got you. Pal Pad, similar, but not quite the same. You get to put 2 support cards into your deck and shuffle that back up. So there's always a chance to find them. How are you using Palpad and VS Seeker in your decks?
Well, VS Seekers auto include in every deck. It's probably top 3 strongest cards in GLC. Reusing Raihan or Guzma or Hexmaniac, all or whatever the right supporter for that turn is. It's really crucial, very important card. And then Palpad, Palpad's really good in decks with supporter search. So Dragon and Psychic love that card. Even decks with shady dealings can enjoy it quite a bit. So I could see it in something like Water. I don't think we see it outside of those types frequently. I know it's in some lists, but Control probably likes Palpad sometimes. Or cards that have play Pokestop and discard lots of stuff may also have it as a backup recovery option.
Yeah. Yeah, Gym Leader Challenge is such a like, what are you doing for me now sort of format. And so like that's where a card like VS Seeker is gonna have an immediate impact on board states and what's happening. Whereas Pal Pad, if you don't have a way to get that card immediately, you're gonna be digging for that answer and it's gonna be a little bit more difficult. So like you mentioned, VS Seeker auto include, buy them all. There's a cool little the collection. I don't know what the new collection was called, VS Seeker that's pretty cheap. And then Pal Pad has some cool arts, but not as useful. All right, some utility items here: field blower, professor's letter, and earthen vessel. So field blower, get to choose up to two in any combination of Pokemon tools or stadium cards in play. Discard them, which is great. Professor's letter and earthen vessel both let you go grab two basic energy cards to hand. Earthen vessel makes you discard, but it does have the ancient tag on it. So three good cards, pretty good to see in your deck.
Great cards. Field Blower, uh, super good card. Even it's obvious, got its obvious use cases in getting rid of Lux Cape on a giant tank, or getting rid of uh, Fighting Fury Belt or Cape of Toughness, something along those lines, so you can reach a knockout or maybe get a retroactive knockout. But I think it's even good to include for decks, even if you don't care about damage ceilings. Uh, Something like Lightning, which doesn't get played a ton, but if you can get rid of their pivots, and something like Lightning, or there are a couple types that have important pivots like that, that can actually ruin certain strategies. So, really versatile card and important to include in almost every deck.
Yeah. And the thing that like about Field Blower too is where I keep mentioning over the podcast, like I almost want two of them. Obviously, I play against you a lot, which has a lot to do with how many Field Blower effects I want to. But people are getting so good in Gym Leader Challenge. Like they know you have Field Blower, and they are staggering how they play their tools. They're trying to bait you with an impactful stadium, but not the most important stadium. So like using field blower once is so bad. Like you definitely want to try to get your full value out of it. But there are times when you're just like, I got to get rid of this cape now, or like I need to get rid of this pivot because this guy is like drawing six cards with this Reggie Drago, or he's going up into the Chandelure if they're playing Dusk Buddies, and I need to stop that from happening to protect my bench for those three damage counters. So it's like brushing your teeth again. Field blower is not a fun card to play, but you got to do it. I know that there's been some talk about it potentially being a cuttable card, not against the people I play.
The That would be that's a super greedy cut that I think used to be doable, but some of the decks that are out now, I don't know if you can do it.
Yeah, I used to do it, and I regret it now. Now looking back, I'm like a big regret. So play your field blowers. Having energy is nice too, which is why Professor's Letter and Earthen Vessel are up on the screen. Well, those are item cards. Is there like besides, we talked about VS Seeker being an auto include, and maybe Field Blower being that card for at least me personally. Is there an item card that you feel like stands above the best? Like there's a card you always should include in your deck outside of those two?
Oh yeah, Hisuian Heavy Ball for sure. I'd say that's probably the only other one that's truly auto include.
Yep, I agree.
Mm, yeah.
Well, let's get to tools. March of last year, I want to say, 2023, we had the rule change. So tools used to be item cards, and it affected lots of search options for the way cards were worded, right? Like you could used to trying to think of a card that searched for items specifically. You could go grab a tool with that card.
Pokestop.
Yeah, Pokestop. So if you Pokestop, you hit Field Blower, or not Field Blower, you hit Floatstone, you could grab it off a Pokestop. Well, the rule has changed, and now they're two separate entities. So we're going to talk about tools as a separate entity now, a year on since the rule change. The first three we're going to talk about are your retreat aids. You got Floatstone, which reduces the retreat cost to nothing. You have Air Balloon, which reduces it by 2. And then you have U-turn board, which is only 1, but it has the added luxury of if it's discarded, it just pops back to hand.
Yep. And U-turn boards picking up in popularity a lot. I think It's way up in price recently. Like it's several dollars for one. It used to be 20 cents or something. So that's a bit curious to me, but it's a really good card, especially because if you only play one, if you're only playing Floatstone, it can feel kind of bad to lose your pivot. So U-turn board in certain decks where you have low retreat costs, really nice add there. And if you have a deck like Dusk Buddies with Chandelure or Lightning, where you're attaching energy to the bench from support Pokemon, having multiple retreat tools is important, and you definitely don't want to put them all out there at the same time. So I don't know. I guess there's maybe the very occasional deck that can play without a retreat tool, but I think it's very occasional.
Yeah, I don't. Recently, I can't even think of a deck that would not want at least Floatstone. I think Floatstone's like your obviously your go-to option. If you're not playing Floatstone, like you mentioned, U-turn board is the other option, especially with low retreat Pokemon. I think Turbo Lax is maybe playing Floatstone and U-turn board. Just thinking of like maybe like one of the top decks at the moment. Hitmon
Just
Bros,
U-turn.
just U-turn. Okay. Hitmons loves U-turn. I mean, the great thing about U-turn is like your opponent is going to have Field Blower. We just talked about it being a staple. Like Field Blowers out there, U-turn board doesn't care. Like you're always going to have it. The only way that they're going to be able to get rid of your U-turn board is like Field Blower into Hand Disruption spell. Which like is that what you like? If your opponent's doing that, like you're probably not in a terrible spot. In all honesty.
Mhm. Agreed.
Um, all right. Damage buff tools. So Muscle Band is pretty universal card in most decks. Just increase damage to the active by 20 more damage. Fighting Fury Belt kind of fits this hybrid role. It's an increase in damage by 10, but also boost HP by 40, but only on a basic. Muscle Band's fallen off a bit. I don't see it as many lists as I used to, Weeder.
Think it's just not as necessary anymore. They're printing cards that do so much damage now that probably not required. I mean, a lot of the basics they print have 140, 160, 180 damage, and so the taking a knockout is probably not as difficult as it used to be.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I remember back in the days when I was playing plus power in my retro deck, and that's just like plus 10 damage, and that's like one of the best cards in the format. And well, Muscle Band is two of those, and it gets to stick around. But like cards like Strong Energy exist, 20 more damage for your fighting Pokemon. Powerful Energy in Colorless, which is 20 more damage on an energy. Like these are just really, really good effects. And hitting that 130 threshold, that bar has shifted. It's no longer just 130. Like I'm almost like I need to make sure most of my Pokemon hit that 150 Snorlax mark. Like that's my new bar. So is Muscle Band getting me there? I don't know. Should I be relying on Pokemon that scale in damage based on energy attachments? I'm gonna need energy in my deck anyway. I could make an energy into a Muscle Band if I'm playing a Hydro Pumper, right? Like it's the same kind of effect. So maybe Muscle Band not as strong as it used to be, but still pretty important. I would play it in most lists off the top of my head. All right, the TMs, and it's hard to say that any one TM is a staple, but I think unanimously, I think we can say that most decks are trying to play one of these technical machines, and they have some varying uses. So I'll just real quickly talk them through, and then maybe we can talk about maybe a couple decks that would want them. But your spread decks, Blindside and Devolution here are usually going to see play in those. Blindside is 100 damage to any Pokemon with damage counters on it, while Devo devolves all of your opponent's Pokemon by one evolution line. Evolution is the counterpart, which helps you evolve two of your bench Pokemon up to the next stage. Turbo Energize grabs 2 energy from the deck and attaches them to your bench Pokemon in any way you like. And then the newest technical machine is Crisis Punch, which states that if your opponent has 1 prize card remaining, you can do a 280 damage for 3 energy. So again, interesting cards that have created a lot of diversity in Gym Eater Challenge. Staple level, would you say yet, Weeder?
For sure would say that one of the five is a staple, like you were saying. Most decks are playing at least one, and then I think a lot of decks there will play like a combination of them depending on the type of deck. So spread decks uh, sometimes like to play blindside and devolution if the evolving might get them some crucial knockouts. Or you might see a deck play. I think evolution decks are probably only playing Team Evolution, and if you can't, if you're deciding between Turbo Energize and Team Evolution, they're both really good on turn one. So I think you've probably got conflicting strategies there if you're running both. So I think that's really a pick one or the other. But I like the TMs. They've revived some old cards that didn't really see usage. So all of the ancient trait, what is it? Omega?
Barrage.
Which Barrage, sorry, Barrage. The ones that let you attack twice are really good for Crisis Punch, Blindside. It's really good for all of them. So that's we've got two or three types there that can utilize that. It's made for some interesting new styles of play. So I think they're a good add to the format.
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually of a different opinion. I think that if you're running Evolution or Energize, you want the other one, just because you want a second out to an explosive start in case of poor prizing. So that's how I kind of feel like if I'm running like this Guz Mahala package in my deck and I don't hit Evolution, well, Energize will hopefully be in my deck too, and then that way I have like another way to kind of keep turboing out whatever my deck is doing. So that's my thought behind it, but I get your point because having a dead card in your singleton deck can also feel bad at times.
I can see the redundancy is always good. So
Mm.
I see that.
Yep. Well, the next two are HP boosters, and I've included just two, but there's really a third one that's just a functional reprint of the other one on the screen here. So, Luxurious Cape is the new card that's kind of the hotness at the moment in terms of tool cards. So, Luxurious Cape is your Pokemon gets 100 and extra HP if it's not doesn't have a rule box, which is everything in Gym Leader Challenge. If it's knocked out from damage, which is an important line of text, that player takes one more prize. So your Snorlax has 250 HP, your Gallade has 260, your Wailord has 300, effectively 330. So Luxurious Cape, a big boost to decks that are relying on maybe one key support or one key big attacker. Cape of Toughness and its functional reprint Bravery Charm give a basic Pokemon 50 more HP. So again, snap it on like Terrakion, give it 170 HP. Great Tusk, the same thing, 190 HP. So you're giving your basics basically the same HP potential as a Torterra, which is a stage 2 in grass.
Yeah, and these tools are most likely the only reason tank strategies can possibly exist. Um, I think a popular strategy with the Cape of Toughness, Bravery Charm is having giant basics. So you run like a bunch of all three of the basic HP boosting tools, and that gives you a lot of redundancy, and one field blower can't clear them all. So that's a win condition for several different decks. And yeah, getting something to unkillable range with Luxcape is a really strong way to go about it. If you can chain heals or just even take multiple knockouts in a row, sometimes can give you time to build up another attacker. So really important tool cards used in all over the place.
Yeah. And this is where, like I mentioned, like DLC players are getting too good. Like, they're going to bait you with a Cape of Toughness on one of their Pokemon. You're going to field blower that, and then they're going to be like, cool, here's my Luxurious Cape. Can you deal with this? They're going to stagger the way they play their tools. So just something to look out for. Should be noted that Luxurious Cape, super awesome card. If you do KO it with poison damage, it gets around the two prizes. The same thing with damage counters. So it's interesting how Luxurious Cape kind of interacts with different things in the format. It's a super balanced card. Card that I thought would maybe be oppressive, but I think it's just like added so much like fun and freshness to kind of how decks are played and like the different like back and forth between you and your opponent and how you hold on to cards and how you use them. So Luxurious Cape, big positive, I think.
Good card.
All right, staple stadiums, and there's really only three. Maybe we could tag on Lost Zone or Lost City here too, but I think the big three that see play outside of like type specific cards, and then there's a million, stadiums that have like specific niche uses. But I think that these are cards that are universally played in a number of different decks. Chaotic Swell, which basically is a do nothing stadium. The only thing it does is if your opponent tries to play a stadium, Chaotic Swell and the next stadium are then discarded. Parallel City is pretty interesting. It's got a ton of text on it, but basically you can face it in different directions. One side limits that person's bench to 3, and the other side limits damage from grass, fire, and water Pokemon by 20 damage. So if you're playing a deck that doesn't isn't grass, fire, or water, basically no negative to playing Parallel City while you limit your opponent's bench. And then Artisan is just search up for a basic Pokemon that doesn't have a rules box and put it onto your bench. So kind of a basic search for those decks that didn't have that type beforehand. But even some decks play their type specific one and Artisan as well.
Yeah, all of these are super important stadiums and the decks they go in. Artisan helped increase consistency in grass or psychic by getting setup decks by getting basics down faster. Parallel City was the card that really shut down grass and kept it from, I think, getting something banned probably. It became more and more popular over time. And one of the strongest effects to ever be printed, uh, permanently limiting bench size while it's in play can be oppressive in the right scenarios, but it is a stadium, so it's easy enough to remove. And then Chaotic Swell is great when you don't really care much about your stadiums, but there are a lot of types with strong type specific stadiums that you don't want to have to deal with. So Swell can get rid of 2 of them. So it's a great defensive stadium.
Yep, for sure. And I think those are why they're staples, but not every deck is going to play them because, again, there are so many type specific stadiums that are pretty busted. All right. That's our staple episode. I think we covered them. Any that I left off, Wheatr? Anything that popped into your head as we went on that you felt like was a staple that's worth mentioning?
I think one that we'll see get more popular over time is Lost City.
Mhm.
You mentioned it just a minute ago, but I think that's probably currently the most important stadium that people aren't playing and might need to work it into their strategy because Gust plus Lost City can ruin a lot of decks that are popular in the format right now and auto win games. So I am including it in more of my decks, and I think people would see some success if they did so in theirs.
Yeah. Lost City is going to be a good one. It's just, whether or not your deck can also accommodate having Lost City used against it. And that's, I think, where maybe a lot of people were kind of like on the fence of Lost City, like, should I play it or should I not? I mean, Hitmon Bros just auto loses if anything gets Lost City at any point in that game, basically. So, like, I can't play it in that deck. And if someone plays it against me, it's just like, cool, GG's. Like, if that ever becomes more popular, I think fighting gets a lot worse. At the same time, recurring basics is a key in almost every deck. And getting Gust and Lost City in the same turn without help is tough. Like, you can't teammates and do it immediately. So it takes a lot of, like, planning out your turns, like, well in advance for this really to be an effective tool. So that's kind of where I'm at with whether or not I should include Lost City in my builds. Is it going to be worth it? Is it going to screw me over in the long run? And a lot of times the answer is yes.
Yep, I
I,
hear you on that front. It is hard. I guess there are maybe 3 or 4 types that can easily search it out. So yeah, I see those points for
yeah.
sure.
I'm also in a campaign to make sure that Lost City doesn't end up because I do think it is a not fun card. It's a good card. If you're trying to be competitive, you should probably find a way to work it into your list if you can handle it. But if you're trying to make friends and their deck is like, yeah, I'm gonna keep using Torterra over and over and over again. It's gonna be super awesome. And you're like, nope, you're not. You might not make some friends if you do that. I'm not referencing our last match at all, Weeder.
I was gonna say, I hope we're still friends.
Oh, best of friends. Just keep Lost City out of it. Well, all right, Weeder. shout outs. Hey, Summer Championships coming up. I think this is the third week running. We've been mentioning it on the podcast. July 13th, 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. It's going to take place in the Cardboard Warrior Discord. Shout out to Heavily Played, your baby there. You got the t-shirt on too. And a $100 prize pool to the winner. What are your thoughts on the Summer Championship?
Well, I hope Mahone mentioned a limitation, a potential limitation on Twin and DCE. So it'll be interesting to see if that's in effect by then. If not, I think we'll see the usual suspects of colorless in the top, or probably multiple. But yeah, I love big tournaments. Love to see what comes out on top. Always excited just to watch some good players play and have a lot of people interact. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. I think I'm going to stick to my guns on my prediction. I think that someone is going to actually play whales this time. This
So.
jumbo whale lord, and I think that deck will actually do pretty well. I don't know if that deck will actually do pretty well though if someone decides to play Tinkaton Gallade or one of those like traditional psychic lists, because I think that deck is the hotness at the moment. I've played against it a couple times in the Async League, and I just forget how good Wobbuffet is against setup decks sometimes.
Mhm.
It's just so good. And like I was just sitting there like, I can't Drizzile and Inteleon, and that really gets Waterless going. So I think if someone shows up with that, they'll be doing pretty well. And then I'll be interested to see if someone kind of makes a meta call and is like, well, I think people should be playing Tinkaton Gallade. I'm going to bring Turbo Dark because it might be some interesting like metagame strategy here where like Turbo Dark just ends up running the gauntlet of like people trying to place their psychic decks because they think it's good and just like takes the dub on this tournament. I think that would be super awesome. But of course, I think Kalos will probably win it all, realistically, as it's been doing, as it will continue to do for a while.
For sure. Yeah, looking forward to find out.
Yeah. All right, last shout out. I'll get a Patreon now. If you like me, use it. If not, it's fine. It won't hurt my feelings. That's the deal. This way. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, hey, Wheatr. Thanks for joining me for the staple episode. It was a pleasure to have you on for, again, the second or third time. I can't remember.
Second time, glad to be here. Hope there's a third.
Oh, yeah. Always.
Always enjoy talking GLC with you. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. It was a pleasure. Well, everyone, have a wonderful afternoon. And we'll see you guys back next week for more Let Loose, the podcast related to all things Gym Leader Challenge in the Pokemon TCG. Have a good one.